With only a minute and 37 seconds left on the clock and a 5-point difference, the game could go either way. I could almost feel the sweat, nerves, and emotion on the court from my bedroom. I could feel myself leaning closer and closer as the clock clicked down. Bill Self could possibly lead the Jayhawks to their 4th championship title. Instead, Kentucky pulled further ahead and ended the game with an 8-point lead. This gave them their first championship since 1998. If you didn't know already, this was the championship game of last spring's NCAA men's basketball tournament. Some of you may have watched it along as me, and some of you may not have. Today, though, I'm going to tell you all about the tournament, which is widely known as March Madness. I have watched this tournament for years, and I look forward to it every spring, so I already knew about it before I was researching more in depth. I also used credible sources to clear up some things I didn't know and learn more about it. Today I'm going to tell you about how the tournament has evolved from when it first started, the current structure of it, and some top teams that have thrived throughout the years. March Madness has changed quite a bit from when it first started just as a small tournament. The first thing I'm going to tell you about is the history of the tournament and some major events. According to the NCAA tournament history on tourneytravel.com, the first tournament was held in 1939, and Oregon won it over Ohio State. This tournament consisted of just 8 teams and had 2 regions. When the tournament first started, it wasn't as big as it is today, and the NIT tournament was also competitive. Some teams entered both, and in 1950, CCNY won both titles. In 1951, 8 more teams were added to the tournament to make it 16 teams competing. And a year later, the first true Final Four was held in Seattle. 4 years after that, the tournament was split up into 4 regions, which we still have today. A memorable tradition was started in 1960, and according to March Madness traditions cutting down the nets on collegebasketbalkodds.net, UCLA cut down the nets after they won their first championship. This tradition has stuck, so now every year the winning team gets to cut down their nets and keep them. In 1966, Texas Western beat Kentucky. This was important because this was the first starting all-black that beat an all-white starting 5. Between 1975 and 1985, the tournament slowly grew to 64 teams. Until 1975, only 1 team from each conference was allowed to compete, but this year that changed. And in 1979, they started seeding the teams. In 2008, it was the first time ever that all 4 number 1 seeded teams made it to the Final Four. And in 2011, according to the last 4 at-large to play in first round by Andy Katz on ESPN.com, the tournament expanded to 68 teams. This is how it is now, and I will explain this more later. And now that you know the history of the tournament, I'm going to tell you how it is currently structured. The way it's laid out, it actually looks pretty simple, but a lot of work goes into it. According to the principles and procedures for establishing the bracket on NCAA.com, there are 3 phases to establishing the bracket. The first phase is a committee chooses the 37 best at-large teams that are not automatic qualifiers. An automatic qualifier is a team that has won a championship tournament, and 30 teams are given this bid. 1 other team is given an automatic qualifying bid, and that is the Ivy League regular season champion. If you didn't add those numbers up, that means there's 68 teams in the tournament. And the next phase is to seed these from 1 to 68, and this number will help them place them into the regional bracket. And this is how the bracket is currently laid out. So as you can tell, there's 4 regional brackets, and the last phase is placing each of the 16 teams in each of these. And the 4 regions are South, East, West, and Midwest. The teams again are ranked from 1 to 16, and they're placed in order. And there are a few things to be taken into consideration when placing these teams. First of all, the first 3 teams that are selected from a conference have to be placed in different regions. And unless there are more than 8 teams from a conference, no more than 2 are allowed in a region. And lastly, the teams have to remain as close as possible to home. Once all the seeding is done, the way the teams play each other is simple. There's 7 rounds. According to the article on ESPN.com, the first round consists of just 8 teams. The Final Four at-large teams and the Final Four automatic qualifiers are the 8 teams that meet, and the winners get their spot into the 64-team draw. So as you can tell, the first round is on the bottom, and then the winners go up into the larger bracket. The second round is when the tournament really starts. The first seed will play the 16th seed, and the second team will play the 15th seed team, and so on, and that happens in all 4 brackets. The winners will continually move on and play the other winners. The intent is that by the Final Four, all 4 number 1 seeded teams will play each other, so the supposedly best teams play. Okay, so now that you know the history and the current structure of it, the last thing I'm going to tell you about is the top teams that have thrived throughout the years. Of course, many teams have their off years, but there have been many that have done well and are exciting to look forward to play. I'm going to talk about the teams with the most championship titles. According to NCAA tournament history on CBSSports.com, UCLA has 11 championships. The NCAA basketball tournament history on ESPN.com said that they have not won a championship since 1995, and before that it was 1975. Kentucky is the number 2 team with 8 championships, and like I said earlier, they won their 8th title this past year against KU. The next two teams are tied with 5 wins each, and they are Indiana and North Carolina. The last team is Duke, and they got their 4th win just 2 years ago. I'm sure some of you are basketball fans and some of you know nothing about it at all, but now that you have heard all about it, I hope you learned a little bit more than you knew before. In conclusion, this is a huge deal for basketball fans and for the teams. As you can see, it has changed a lot since it first started with 8 teams. It has gone through many transformations to get to where it is today and to the 64-team draw. There are many top teams that compete and look forward to this month. I know some parts can be confusing to understand how it all works, but in the end it is so much fun to watch because there are so many upsets, and even though the teams are seeded, that's not how it always works out.